of the committee at any time. Pursuant to Committee Rule 5 and House Rule 11, Clause 2, the Chair may postpone further proceedings today on the question of approving any measure or matter or adopting an amendment for which a recorded vote for the yeas and nays are ordered. Now, pursuant to notice, I call up the Chair's resolution authorizing the issuance of subpoena related to security clearances. The clerk will report the resolution, which was distributed in advance.
A resolution offered by Chairman Elijah Cummings.
Without objection, the resolution is considered read and open to amendment at any point. The Chair recognizes himself to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute. Copies of the amendment have been distributed in advance. I yield myself now 5 minutes for an opening statement. First of all, good morning. We are considering a resolution relating to the security clearance process at the White House, a process that is supposed to protect our nation's most closely guarded secrets. Not only our nation's most closely guarded secrets, but closely guarded secrets that affect the world. This resolution would authorize me to issue a subpoena for the testimony of Mr. Carl Klein, who served as White House Personnel Security Director under the Trump administration. Yesterday, I sent a memo to all committee members providing information from a detailed on-the-record interview with a whistleblower, a brave whistleblower, I might add, who currently works in the White House. This brave young lady, the whistleblower, Tricia Newbold, came forward at great personal risk to warn the Congress and the nation about the grave security risks she has been witnessing firsthand over the past 2 years. And she said during her interview with the committee staff, and I quote, and listen up, this is what she said: I would not be doing a service to myself, my country, or my children if I sat back knowing that the issues that we have could have impact on national security, end of quote. Ms. Newbold has worked as a dedicated employee at the White House under both Republican and Democratic administrations for 18 long years, giving her blood, sweat, and tears to make sure that the security clearance process works properly. She has informed the committee that during the Trump administration, she and other career officials adjudicated denials of dozens of applications for security clearances that were later overturned. As a result, she warned that security clearance applications for the White House officials, quote, were not always adjudicated in the best interests of national security, end of quote. She raised her concerns inside the White House. Inside the White House. And they targeted her for retaliation. Yet, despite these risks, she has agreed to identify herself publicly at this time because she strongly believes that the Congress must intervene immediately to safeguard our national security. In fact, she implored the committee to act now, warning that, and I quote, "This is my last hope to really bring the integrity back into our office," end of quote. I just want to emphasize that point. She came forward because the system at the White House is so dysfunctional that she believes that Congress needs to intervene. In other words, she's crying out. She's begging us to do something because she simply wants her government to work the way it's supposed to work. She gets it after 18 years. Ms. Dubose came forward out of concern for her country and national security. And she called on us to act, to do our jobs. She just said, just do your job. We do our job. She's done hers, to conduct credible, independent oversight. Now, with respect to Mr. Klein, we first asked the White House to could we interview Mr. Klein back in January, along with everyone else in the security clearance office. You know what they said? No. Then the committee sent a letter directly to Mr. Klein in February. He responded. He never responded. Zilch. Then the committee sent a third letter in March explaining to Mr. Klein that if he did not respond, our next step was going to be a compulsory process. He never responded to that letter. In addition, on March 1st, more than a month ago, I wrote to the White House counsel yet again, and I warned them explicitly that this was the, quote, final time, end of quote, that I was going to ask for voluntary compliance. They still refused. To this day, they have not produced a single piece of paper or a single requested witness to this committee. It was not until yesterday, keep in mind, we started in January. It was not until yesterday, after the whistleblower's claims were made public, and less than 24 hours before today's subpoena vote, that we finally received last-minute letters from Mr. Klein's lawyer and the White House saying that he would voluntarily comply. But, and there is a big but here, but there's a catch. He will come in voluntarily, but he will not answer any of our questions about specific officials, about specific security violations, or about specific security clearance adjudications. Instead, he will only talk about general policies. This is clearly not sufficient, and he knows that. And so I strongly urge my colleagues to support this subpoena. The White House needs to understand that they cannot stonewall and stall this committee for months and then just offer us a general information about their policies, not when there's such serious allegations of a risk to national security. To my colleagues, I ask that you read the memo and read it carefully. In fact, I urge you to read Mr. Jordan's memo carefully, too, because it makes a very good case for this committee's need to see Mr. Klein and have him come in and answer all of our questions. And let me be clear. Over and over again, I hear these comments about, oh, they're just trying to embarrass the president. No, that is not true. What we're trying to do is protect our secrets. We're trying to make sure we have a process that works. And we have spent, for you who are new here, we've spent a long time over the last session dealing with clearances and information, classified information trying to make sure it never gets into the hands of the people who it should not be in the hands of. So, again, Ms. Newbold has come forward. She said, please, you got a lady in there in the White House who is begging us to just do our job. And I beg for the same thing. With that, I yield to the distinguished, I yield to the distinguished gentleman, Mr. Jordan, for his opening, for your statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I almost don't know where to start. Almost don't know where to begin. 10 days ago, on a Saturday, you scheduled a transcribed interview with Ms. Newbold on a Saturday and didn't tell the Republicans until the day before. 3:30 the day before, you schedule a 8:30 a.m. interview for the very next day. At the organizational meeting of this committee, you pledged you would not do that. You said closed-door testimony would be done so that members could attend, but you pick a Saturday on a week we're not even in session and tell us the day before. And then yesterday you issue a press release, hand-pick, cherry-pick parts of her testimony, Ms. Newbold's testimony, and you issue a big memo and a big press release after interviewing one witness. That's how we're going to do investigations in the Oversight Committee? Talk to one person and then issue a big press statement so you can get some headlines? First a Saturday deposition, then yesterday a press release after talking to just one witness where you handpick a few parts of her testimony, and now today we're going to subpoena a guy who just sent us a letter saying he's willing to come here voluntarily. I've been on this committee 10 years. I've never seen anything like this.
Oh, please.
Never seen anything like this. I haven't.
Yeah, you've done it.
I haven't. I'll tell you what else I've never seen. I tell you what else I've never seen. I've never seen a witness come in front of this committee and lie to us 7 times and us not, as a committee, do something about it. Won't do anything about.
No more Wilbur Ross statements, please. I'm sorry.
We won't do anything about a guy who lied to us 7 times, but we'll schedule a deposition on a Saturday of a week we're not here, notify the minority the day before, do a press release yesterday after talking to just one witness, and then subpoena somebody who's already agreed to come voluntarily. That's how this committee is going to operate? And frankly, it gets worse, because we got another resolution with 3 more subpoenas. 3 more subpoenas, 1 to the Commerce Department for documents, 1 to the Justice Department for documents, and 1 to a witness who's already come and set for a transcribed interview, Mr. Gore. The Commerce Department has given us over 11,000 documents. Just 3 weeks ago, the Secretary of Commerce came here, Mr. Ross, 82-year-old Mr. Ross, came here and answered questions for over 6 hours. But that's not good enough. We're going to subpoena documents from Commerce, from Justice, and now subpoena Mr. Gore, who's already set for a transcribed interview. And why are we going to do that? Why are we going to do that? Because the Democrats want to interfere with the court case. 3 weeks from today, the Supreme Court's going to hear arguments about a simple question. On the census, should we ask people if they're citizens of this great country? The Democrats say no. Most Americans think we're already doing it because we are. But the Democrats want to interfere with the court case. And you know why we know they want to interfere in the court case, with the court case? Because they said so. A Democrat member of this committee said, we want to do all this because we want information, quote, that the courts can use. That is as wrong as it gets. So we can't take action for a guy who lied to us, their first big witness at their first announced big hearing. We can't take action as a committee for a guy who lied to us 7 times, but we're going to interfere with a court case because we want information to help us in this decision not to put a simple question on the census. This is wrong. I urge all members to oppose both resolutions, to oppose all these subpoenas. Let's have this committee operate the way it's supposed to. Let's do the kind of investigations we're supposed to and historically have done. I urge a no vote on both resolutions. And I would yield now to the gentleman from Tennessee.
May I be recognized, Chairman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I have a resolution that I'd like to introduce to the committee's immediate consideration. Mr. Chairman.
He was out of time.
May I be recognized, Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman?
Look at this, says 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I have a resolution I'd like to introduce to the committee for their immediate consideration.
Mr. Chairman, as a matter...
I recognize you, Mr. Christian Morsby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I think it's my time, Mr. Chairman.
Man, you were out of time. It just didn't run. That's
You
all.
didn't run the time, and
We will get, listen to me. We will get to you right after.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll have a resolution.
Green, I got you, Mr. Green.
Thank you.
I promise you. We don't have to go through all this.
well, I think
Mr.
you're-
Christian
I think
Morphy.
you're- I think you're making my point that I've not seen.
Mr. Christian Morphy.
Mr. Chairman, the ranking member accuses the majority of an unfair process for scheduling Ms. Newbold's interview. But as you know, Ms. Newbold came forward at great personal risk in acting as a whistleblower, and she had already been retaliated against, suspended without pay for 2 weeks prior, and so she was understandably scared about being subjected to additional retaliation. That's why she asked for a Saturday time to have her interview conducted. And in fact, none of us had any prior notice before the time that the minority did. In order to protect Ms. Newbold's rights as a whistleblower, the committee was forced to schedule her interview on a weekend. And it was necessary because we've already seen retaliation. We didn't want to see retaliation again. Ms. Newbold sat for a full day of questioning and was available until both Republican and Democratic staff exhausted all of their questions. We followed the whistleblower protocol that both the majority and the minority have agreed to follow. But if the minority would like to have her come back, if they have further questions, I think that perhaps we should have her come back and perhaps we should have her testify in public. I yield back.
Will the gentleman yield? Will the gentleman
Friend yield. Would my friend yield?
Yes, sir.
I thank my friend. I just want to say, if we'd had 8 years of generosity and consideration and civility and decency in how the then majority treated the minority and its rights, the gentleman from Ohio would have a point. But the hands on the other side of the aisle are anything but clean in this respect. They trampled over the rights of witnesses. They actually tried to deter testimony when it went astray from their point of view. In Fast and Furious, for example, about gun control. They declared unilaterally that somebody had forfeited her Fifth Amendment rights in ways that were abusive. And time again, they unilaterally issued subpoenas, including in our face, without any such discussion, without any right of such discussion. This chairman, Mr. Cummings, has bent over backwards to give an opportunity to have a discussion and to have your input heard, maybe to his own detriment. Because, as I predicted earlier, I feared that by extending a courtesy never extended to us, that it would be abused. And I think we are witnessing precisely that. And I'm going to say to my friend, the chairman, that at some point, I hope we reconsider the arrangement we entered into and that the chairman exercise the rights of his predecessors unilaterally to issue subpoenas as he feels investigations warrant. I yield to the chairman. I yield to the chairman.
What?
Gentleman yield.
Mr. Chair, just one other point which Mr. Jordan brought up, which is that Mr. Klein has, quote unquote, voluntarily agreed to come and cooperate with us, but he will not answer questions about specific allegations of breaches of the security clearance process, nor will he answer questions about whistleblower retaliation. He won't produce any documents. So what kind of cooperation is that, Mr. Chairman? I yield back.
Will the gentleman yield for a question?
Yield to me. Would you yield? Thank you. I don't want something hanging out here that is not clear. The ranking member talks about Ms. Newbold. I'm not going to let her be be victimized again. I'm not. This lady was scared. You hear me? She's scared. She's small in stature, and she's already seen what is going on in the White House. She was scared to death, and she was afraid sadly, of our Republican colleagues. And she did not want, she wanted to leave work on, be able to leave work on Friday and not be retaliated against before she left work. And so she wanted to have a short notice for the hearing. That's what happened. And I don't have any problem with trying to make sure that we work together to do these interviews. But I got to tell you, I am going to, and I will do it, and I've done it over and over again, and we have a history of doing it. I will protect whistleblowers, period. And I hope that we all can agree on that. All right? Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I could, at the liberty of the chair, take my 5 minutes, and then I'll put on this issue, and then I'll put that resolution at the end. Would that be okay? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Overturning the security clearances is a choice the Commander-in-Chief can make. He's the President of the United States. It's not against the law. It's not against policy. There have been no leaks of national security information. It's not like this process has led to classified emails being on an unsecure server. We want to use oversight to politicize a decision of the President. Are we going to do that on every single decision that the majority disagrees with? I've been through the top secret security clearance process myself while assigned to special operations, and let me tell you, there are problems with security clearances, but not this one. Right now, some soldiers who enlist into classified jobs are doing KP duty for 12 months waiting for their security clearance. Instead of investigating the President's prerogative to overturn a clearance, his prerogative, we're investigating the President for something that's not against the law, instead of investigating a process that's hurting the national security of this country, where soldiers are waiting for security clearances for a year. This is political brinksmanship. Mr. Chairman, I'm concerned about the credibility of this committee. Promises to hold Mr. Cohen go unaddressed, accountable go unaddressed. Promises to me, Mr. Chairman, to look into active duty increases in active duty suicides to the United States Army and the Marine Corps go unaddressed. Mr. Chairman, if we could just pass this resolution that I am about to propose, we will restore the credibility of this committee and can get on with this hearing. And I therefore, Mr. Chairman, have a resolution that I'd like to introduce for the committee's immediate consideration. I move the committee consider a resolution to refer Michael Cohen to the Justice Department for a perjury investigation and prosecution.
The gentleman has not stated a proper motion.
So, Mr. Chairman, then I make the motion that we have the resolution introduced into this committee's record then.
Mr. Chairman, reserving a point of order.
Very well.
I think it's a UC.
As a matter of point of order, I would ask the chairman as to the germaneness of the gentleman's motion, even if it's just referring to it in the record. What's in front of us is a subpoena motion on an unrelated matter, and I raised the question of germaneness.
Let me say this. It's my understanding, Mr. Green, that Mr. Green merely wants the document in the record. Is that right, Mr. Green?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, a unanimous consent would be great on this.
Yeah, he just wants it in the record.
And it is about, I think the germaneness is there, Mr. Chairman, and if I could answer the question, this is about the credibility of the committee. We're investigating the President on this issue. It does relate. We've made promises that we're going to do certain things, and I think it's relevant, Mr. Chairman.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. It was nice.
Oh, forgive me, Mr. Chairman. Are we still on the gentleman's resolution? Or?
No. Mr. Raskin, do you have something? On the motion.
On the security.
Yes.
On your resolution.
Yes.
I rise in favor of the chairman's resolution very strongly, and I want to start by praising our chairman for standing with whistleblowers, the people who are willing to stand up at great personal risk, at great personal cost, to say that something has gone fundamentally awry in the government. As I understand it, Ms. Newbold has worked for 18 years for Republican presidents, for Democratic presidents, and comes forward to say she has never seen anything like what has been taking place in the White House Security Clearance Office. She is personally reporting 25 cases where the professional staff have said that somebody should not be granted a security clearance. They don't say this for trivial reasons, as you know, Mr. Chairman. They are looking only for people who are compromised by foreign powers, or have a business conflict of interest, or have engaged in criminal behavior that would cast doubt on their ability to possess security information, or they have a drug or alcohol problem. As I understand it, those are the categories. And 25 people, the professional staff recommended, should not be granted security clearances, and this was overruled. This is a systemic crisis for all Americans. Not for Democrats or Republicans or liberals or conservatives, for all of us. This is our security clearance office. Then, Ms. Newbold goes to her supervisor to say, this is not how it should be done. And if you're going to overrule us, you've got to document why and explain how you have information that negates or excuses the initial problem. And they weren't doing it. And she got no satisfaction from her immediate supervisor, so she went to his supervisor. Then she went to the White House counsel's office, and all she gets is a chain of people telling her to go back to her desk and to be quiet. So she comes to our committee. This woman is an American hero for what she's doing. She is standing up for the American people, and she comes and she says, this is her final hope to come to the Oversight Committee, to Mr. Cummings, to Chairman Cummings and the members. And what do we get from the other side? Well, the president can do whatever he wants. You know why? Because we've got a king in America. Forget the American Revolution. Forget the Constitution. We've got a king. The president can do whatever he wants now. We have no rule of law that applies to the president. The president can fire anybody he wants. The president can squelch criminal investigations. The president can tell prosecutors to drop cases against people. We've got a king in America. They've elected us a king, Mr. Chairman. So I'm moved by what the gentleman from Virginia says, which is you have operated with the most extraordinary patience and indulgence towards our colleagues across the aisle. Your predecessors in this job never would have allowed the kind of discussions which you allow routinely every day in this committee. And what do they use it for? They use it to mischaracterize what's taking place. This is not some kind of attack on the president. We're trying to vindicate the security clearance process for the American people, for our government. So do I support your resolution? With every fiber of my being, I support your resolution, Mr. Chairman. Every member of this committee should support it. Can you imagine if under President Obama, 25 people were denied security clearances by the professional staff, and then President Obama said, no, let's go ahead and give them their security clearances? Do you know what our friends across the aisle would be saying now? I would gladly yield to one of them if they would say that they would have accepted that without protesting. So, Mr. Chairman, we need to pass your resolution, and we need to move forward with dispatch, and let us bring this whistleblower back in. She's an American hero for what she's done today. I yield back to the chairman.
Would you yield to me, please?
Yes, I yield to the chairman.
Let me say this, that I want to thank you, Mr. Ashton, for what you just said. You know, I want to be clear. I mean, I listened to folks talking about motives. I'm hoping that we all have one motive, and that is to protect the people of this great country. 9/11 was not that long ago, and we have a duty. And you know, I learned more about security clearances as a ranking member of the Benghazi Committee, and how my Republican colleagues, made it clear that they didn't want to see one syllable of any kind of classified information get into the hands of anybody who shouldn't have it. And here we have at least 25 people who have been recommended not to have security clearances. And last but not least, Mr. Green said that we should not be investigating the president, but we should be investigating the process. Well, Mr. Green, that's what we're doing. We're investigating the process. It is a process. And by the way, that is what Ms. Newbold said. And by the way, and this thing about cherry picking, nothing that could be further from the truth. We have put in, and you will see, we will get that transcript out here. But again, Ms. Newbold had some complimentary things to say to Mr. Green, and we put that out there, and about certain personnel in the White House. So I just want to make that clear. We're just trying to do our job. And, I mean, folk may want to not allow us to do our job, but I'm going to do my job.
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
The distinguished gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Meadows.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to make sure that in a spirit of civility, that we recognize two different areas that I think we need to address as a committee. One is with regards to whistleblower protection. This individual who came in, regardless of the information that she shared, if she is a whistleblower, deserves our protection. And I will stand with you to make sure she is protected. You know that you and I have been able to do this in a bipartisan way, and so nothing here today should be construed, if she's watching, to suggest that there will be any attempt on our side of the aisle to come after her. And that's my pledge to you, Mr. Chairman. And I think that from this standpoint, we need to make sure that whistleblowers, regardless of the information that comes forth, are protected. This committee has had a bipartisan support of that, and I want to make sure that that's clear to my friends opposite. I do have one concern, and my concern is, you know that I try to make every attempt to be at transcribed interviews and depositions, and to suggest to this committee that we found out at 3:30 on a Friday afternoon that she was coming in on Saturday, I don't think the facts will bear that out. I tried to make arrangements once I found out to get here on Saturday morning and couldn't logistically do that. I will commit to protect every whistleblower that you bring in. But I do think that we need to make sure that we have the ability as members of Congress to hear firsthand. You know, there were 8 hours or 6 or 7 hours of transcribed interviews that I would have loved to have heard the back and forth. And so my good friend, Mr. Krishnamurthy, suggested that no one knew until 3:15 on Friday. Well, maybe no members knew, but I can guarantee you staff somewhere knew. There was no way to coordinate a Saturday transcribed interview without that. Now, that being said, I know that that in a spirit of civility, I would ask that you give us notice at times where we can make plans to be here, if at all possible. And with that, I yield.
Gentleman, yield.
Sure.
First of all, I want to thank the gentleman for what you just said, and I know you mean every syllable. I believe that from the depths of my heart. This is a very, very difficult situation with this witness, this whistleblower. She feels that she was already retaliated against. I want you to understand what happened. And she gets off at 3:30. And she was afraid. I'm just telling you what she said to us. She basically begged us not to put her name out there and she wanted, you know what she wanted to do? She just wanted to get off of work. So as soon as she got off of work, because she was afraid she'd be retaliated against on that Friday if the word got out. And so that's when we gave the notice. But I understand what you're saying.
And so if in the future, Mr. Chairman, if we could do this, if we could say, listen, that we have a potential for a sensitive witness that will be coming in this Saturday. If we knew 4 or 5 days ahead of time, if the staff knew that, just say you may want to be back without any details, because I know we leaked like a 40-year-old John boat. I mean, I get that. But at the same time, it would help for some of us who take this extremely serious. And when a whistleblower, I mean, when we had the issue with the Secret Service and a number of people that were saying that the Secret Service were not doing their job under the previous administration.
Right.
I was getting phone calls on my cell phone, and every single whistleblower got protection and deserve protection, and this whistleblower will get the same, but I just would ask the courtesy.
I would, finally, let me say this. I'm sure that Ms. Newbold is watching. And just you saying what you just said, not only I think it will give her great comfort, because I talked to her, and the lady was nervous, very, very nervous. But I think it will give other whistleblowers a level of comfort, because I do believe deep in my heart that there are a whole lot of them, and they just want to feel that they're not going to be retaliated against. You know, 18 years of service is a long time, all right? But I want to thank the gentleman for your civility. I really appreciate it. All right, where we go? We got to Clay, right? Mr. Clay, and then I'll come back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, the integrity of the White House's security clearance system depends on fact-based, rule-bound, and documented decisions about security clearances from career officials. Carl Klein was responsible for making sure that security clearances were being adjudicated based on long-established national security protocols. Instead, Mr. Klein appears to have repeatedly and improperly overruled career officials' recommendations to deny eligibility for security clearances to employees in the executive office of the president. These were documented decisions based on disqualifying facts involving foreign influence, conflicts of interest, personal or criminal conduct, or financial problems. If Mr. Klein wanted to overrule these careful determinations, he should have carefully documented the basis for his decision. But Mr. Klein reportedly did not put his own analysis on the record. Instead, it appears he simply swept potential problems under the rug. According to the whistleblower who came forward to the committee, since 2018, Mr. Klein reversed decisions to deny eligibility to access classified information to applicants in at least 25 cases. 25 cases? Sounds like he's enabling corruption. These cases included current senior White House officials, and in one case involving a senior White House official, an outside agency was so concerned that it called to ask how Mr. Klein's office could have given that individual access to our nation's most sensitive information. This should be alarming to all of us. The security clearance system is a critical part of protecting our national security. And in order to keep us safe, everyone needs to follow those processes, from the senior national security official to the custodian who cleans the office. That's why this subpoena is so urgent. Mr. Klein's deposition will be an important step for our committee to examine allegations that the White House abused the security clearance process and to help us intervene to fix it. And I support the subpoena to Mr. Klein, and I look forward to the committee's investigation.
Those are all facts. That's what our concern is. Of course we want protection and treat respectfully anyone who's a whistleblower. And no one on our side has publicly or in this committee criticized Ms. Newbold. But the process is not how this committee is supposed to operate. And that's our concern. I yield back to the gentleman from Michigan.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Ms. Cortez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's important that we refocus on what is at stake here in this investigation, in this matter. We are getting reports from the press and from a wide variety of sources that indicate that, that people are, folks are suggesting that we are conducting foreign relations with folks with security clearances via WhatsApp. I mean, every day that we go on without getting to the bottom of this matter is a day that we are putting hundreds, if not potentially thousands of Americans at risk. I mean, really, what is next? Putting nuclear codes in Instagram DMs? This is ridiculous. We need to get to the bottom of this. And in order to do that, we have to issue subpoenas because people in this administration are not cooperating. And every day that there is an insecure line of communication that could be leaked, that could be hacked, that could be screenshotted without proper channels is a day that we are putting our national security at risk. So the reason why we have to conduct and have these accommodations is because we are a committee that is committed to protecting whistleblowers. And I do have to commend the ranking member and to see the coordination between the ranking member and the chair in a commitment to whistleblowers, not just in respecting them, but in protecting them, is really admirable and important. And I wanted to note that because this is what protecting whistleblowers looks like. When they need a certain accommodation because they fear retaliation, we have to make accommodations. This committee in particular, as the Oversight Committee in the House of Representatives, we have a unique responsibility to protect those that have the courage to come out and say when something is wrong, regardless of the administration. Even in prior administrations, it doesn't matter the party. When something is going wrong in government, when there is overreach, when there is an abuse or a misconduct of process, we have an obligation to see and investigate it out. And so it is so serious, especially as a New Yorker, especially as anyone who cares about the security of what happens on American soil. Every day that we have an insecure line of communication, we have a responsibility to investigate it and to make sure that we get to the bottom of it. So I just needed to put that note in, and I yield the rest.
Would the gentlelady yield?
Chair. Yes.
I just want to just add on to what you have said. First of all, thank you for your very eloquent comments. One of the things I want to make clear to the committee is that when there were recommendations against giving these folks security clearances, we got to think about what were the reasons. That's very important. This is not some lightweight stuff here. The disqualifying reasons were involving foreign influence, conflicts of interest, personal or criminal conduct, financial problems. In other words, these were folks who the career people, Ms. Cortez said, I mean, and by the way, these are people like Ms. Newbold who've been doing this year after year under Republican and Democratic administrations. And so you're right. We take this very seriously, as I think we all do. But it's not enough to take it seriously. We have to act. We have to do what we promised to do when we put up our hands and said we were going to uphold the Constitution and protect the people of these great United States. And so I just wanted to make it clear that this is not some lightweight thing that somebody did back in high school or something, But this is major stuff, and there's a reason why there were this information came forward, and this is a reason why they people like Ms. Newbold would recommend not having these people qualified for security clearance. I yield back to the lady.
Thank you. And I'd also like to indicate and note that some of the folks that may have insecure, had their clearances overrode or recommendations against giving them the clearance overrode are even custodial staff. And folks would say, oh, that's not important. That overriding a security clearance for a custodial staff is not a big deal. But first of all, every member of this government is important and has access to important information and has power. And especially when we're talking about people that have physical presence and access to secure and sensitive physical spaces in the White House, to be potentially compromised is extremely concerning.
I thank the gentlelady. Mr. Heiss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want really a point of clarification on something that it sounds like has been said, and I just want to know if this is really the case or not, but it sounded as though the reason that our staff was not informed of the Ms. Newbolt's interview was because she was scared of Republicans. Is that correct?
I think that's a fair characterization.
Okay, so obviously the question then, is this going to be a precedent that if someone expresses fear, we're going to throw process out the door and we're not going to be informed?
Let me say, she was scared, and I think Mr. Meadows alluded to this too, because he agreed to what I'm about to say to some degree. She was literally afraid that the Republicans would go out, and I've explained this now twice, would go out and the White House would find out that she was a whistleblower and that she would be retaliated against. And that's why it was timed the way it was timed. I'm going to do, we have a situation where we've got a whistleblower. It's a very delicate situation, and we've been dealing with this for years. There were instances when the Republicans were in control, and they didn't want to talk to us. They were concerned. So what we try to do is try to accommodate the witness. She wanted, you think I want to have? I don't want to have have my people come in there on Saturday. But that was to accommodate the witness, and all I can say is I'll do the best I can. Now, going back to what the ranking member just said, again, he has a way of not properly stating what I say. We said with regard to depositions, we would make sure that there was a proper notice. This was a voluntary interview by Ms. Newbold. And again, I want to have the bipartisanship. And so we gave it in consideration of what the witness had to say and her feelings. That's how we had to do it, and that's how we did it.
Can I have some of my time back with that, because I didn't mean to.
Well, I mean, you asked me a question, and I.
Yeah, I didn't think it was going to be that long of an answer.
No. I don't want to keep answering the same question. That's why. But go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. It just seems if a witness is going to say, I'm scared of Republicans, therefore we're not going to inform Republicans, that in itself is a scary process to go down. And in this whole situation, when we have a member of this committee state that the purpose of a previous hearing was to influence the Supreme Court, that in itself is a scary situation for this committee to then become a tool to influence the Supreme Court, Mr. Chairman. There's fear on both sides of the aisle, and we've got to keep this thing right and fair. Process means something, or it means nothing at all. And I would just urge the chairman to keep us informed in the future, and I'll yield to the ranking member.
Well, I would just make the point that I thank the gentleman for yielding. The chairman said you had to have this happen on a Saturday. Couldn't tell us until Friday afternoon the day before. And the whistleblower was nervous Republicans were going to go out and talk about it. But then 10 days later, the Democrats divulged her name. We didn't do that. You guys did. You guys put her name out there. We did it. We haven't said a darn thing about it until you did the press release. And you put her name out there. So I'm not following, I don't know if there is any logic to it.
I'll answer you.
You said she was nervous that Republicans would talk about the fact that she was there, and then you go release her name. I don't get it. We didn't release her name.
The gentleman will yield.
Mr. Heiss.
Gentleman, yield. We have whistleblower protocol, and I'm sure you know that. We went by the whistleblower protocol. When her name was released is when she said she had authorized us to release her name.
I understand that.
All right. Okay. Mr. Heiss, I think you have 30 more seconds. All right, very well. All right, where are we? Well, who's next? Ms. Spear. Ms. Spear, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me also associate myself with the comments made by so many of my colleagues about how remarkably restrained you have been with a continual attack by our colleagues, for the most part, on the other side. I want to talk about a couple of facts. The fact is that we have a President of the United States who uses an unsecured cell phone to make midnight calls to people. It does not take a rocket scientist or a cybersecurity hacker from China to figure out how easy it is to get to that phone. The President of the United States, another fact, has declassified sensitive information to the Russian ambassador. Another fact, there is an anti-nepotism law in this country that the President has circumvented by having his daughter and son-in-law work in the White House as volunteers. Another fact, Ms. Nebold has already suffered retaliation by being told that she was going to be put on leave for 2 weeks, presumably without pay. So if we're interested in protecting a whistleblower, what are we doing about that? The President, furthermore, another fact, overrode a security clearance review of Rob Porter, who was a domestic violence predator. So you bet we have a responsibility to look at this. And we have a person who has been in that office for 18 years under Republican and Democrats who has gone up the chain of command, who has done it the appropriate way, and she now says that her only hope to bring some sanity back to this process is to bring it to Congress. And finally, the ranking member had talked about the janitor whose clearance was suggested to not be provided, and he was mocking, why would we be concerned about that? Well, Mr. Jordan, the reason why we're concerned about persons who are at low-level positions is because oftentimes they are ripe to be bribed.
I didn't talk about that.
And the intelligence community in the United States and across the world focuses in on people who are in need of financial resources as potential assets. So you bet we should be concerned about everyone who works in the White House, who, after being reviewed for a national security clearance, is recommended not to get one. You bet we want to know why. You bet we want to know that there is some justification for it. And if there isn't, they shouldn't be working in the White House or anywhere else. With that, I yield back.
Would the gentleman yield? Would the gentleman yield?
I yield.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, several members have suggested that this committee's investigation into the Department of Commerce and the imposition of a new citizenship question is somehow an attempt to influence the Supreme Court. And I just wanted to clear that up. I mean, I know my colleagues understand how the Supreme Court works. They're not watching the hearings of the Oversight and Reform Committee in order to interpret questions of law. That's not how the Supreme Court works. That's not how law works. If they have an objection, perhaps the objection should be made to the federal court decisions which have been striking down the citizenship question. For example, in State of New York versus U.S. Department of Commerce, the federal district court found this: most blatantly, Secretary Ross ignored and violated a statute that requires him to collect data through the acquisition and use of administrative records. Secretary Ross's decision to add a citizenship question was arbitrary and capricious on its own terms. He failed to consider several important aspects of the problem, alternately ignored, cherry-picked, or badly misconstrued the evidence in the record before him, acted irrationally both in light of that evidence and his own stated decisional criteria, and failed to justify significant departures from past policies and practices, a veritable smorgasbord of classic, clear-cut Administrative Procedure Act violations. Okay, there's an entire record that is before the Supreme Court. That's what the Supreme Court's going to be deciding on, not any of this debate back and forth in our committee, as important as it is to us. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Thank you very much. There being no further discussion on amendments to the resolution, the question now occurs on the adoption of the substitute amendment offered by the chairman. All those in favor shall signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed shall signify by saying nay. No. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it, and the amendment is adopted.
This is just the nature of substitute. We're doing
You want both? We're going to do it?
No.
Okay. The question now occurs on the issue of subpoenas relating to security clearances. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from California seek
I request a roll call vote.
a recorded vote has been requested. All those in favor to vote shall raise their hands to be counted. A sufficient number having raised their hands, a recorded vote is so ordered, and pursuant to Clause 2 of Rule 11, the vote on this question is postponed. Now, pursuant to notice, I call up the chair's resolution authorizing the issuance of subpoenas related to the 2020 census. The clerk will report the resolution, which was distributed in advance.
A resolution offered by Chairman Elijah E. Cummings authorizing issuance of subpoenas related to the 2020 census.
Without objection, the resolution is considered read and open to amendment at any point. The chair recognizes himself to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute. Copies of the amendment have already been distributed and are on the dais. The clerk will report.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute offered by Chairman Elijah E. Cummings of Maryland.
Before I give my opening statement, let me clarify for the members, for your convenience, what we're going to do with regard to the vote is we will wait until after the, how many series of votes do we have today? Just one? Two. After the first series of votes, but we will announce the exact time, because a number of members have said they want to know the exact time. But it'll be after our first series of votes. Follow me? On the floor. All right. And that's so that everybody can be present. All right. The resolution relates to our investigation of the Trump administration's decisions to add a citizenship question to the census. It authorized me to issue 3 subpoenas for the deposition of John Gore, a senior official at the Department of Justice, for documents withheld by DOJ, and for documents withheld by the Department of Commerce. As we all know, last year, Wilbur Ross, the Secretary of Commerce, decided to add a citizenship question to the census, even though his own Census Bureau warned that the question, quote, harms the quality of the census count, end of quote. Secretary Ross testified repeatedly that he added the citizenship question, and I quote, solely, unquote, at the request of DOJ, but the record shows that this was a pretext. In fact, Secretary Ross began a secret campaign to orchestrate the addition of the citizenship questions months before receiving the DOJ requests. The committee is simply trying to determine the real reason Secretary Ross added the citizenship question. And the documents and the testimony covered by these subpoenas are critical to answering that question. None of these requests is new. They're all items we asked for repeatedly, but the Trump administration refused to produce. Let me walk through each subpoena in turn. First, the subpoena for John Gore. On March 7th, Mr. Gore sat for a voluntary interview with committee staff. However, at the instruction of DOJ counsel, he refused, listen up, he refused to answer more than 150 questions about the citizenship question. The reason they gave was because there's a separate ongoing litigation regarding the issue. Secretary Ross tried to make the same argument before our committee, refusing to produce key documents because of, quote, pending litigation. Let me be clear. The administration may not withhold information from Congress because of separate litigation. That is not a valid legal argument. The Supreme Court has rejected this claim repeatedly. It is not the law, and it would lead to absurd results. If this were the policy, we would have to shut down our investigations every time a private party decided to sue a federal agency. I'm genuinely surprised that my Republican colleagues would make this argument themselves, especially when they routinely conducted investigations of the Obama administration while there was separate ongoing litigation. They investigated the Keystone Pipeline, the Affordable Care Act, and Cover Oregon, the Flint water crisis, the Equifax data breach, and many other issues, all while outside the litigation, while litigation was going on. So based on this flawed legal argument, we asked DOJ to bring back Mr. Gore. As an accommodation, we agreed to limit our request to just 18 questions he refused to answer. Now, keep in mind, he had refused to answer 150, but we just wanted him to come back and answer 18. DOJ refused. That is why the subpoena is necessary. With respect to the second and third subpoenas, they each seek documents that the Department of Justice and the Department of Commerce refuse to turn over or refuse to produce without redactions. Now, they will claim that they have turned over thousands of pages of documents. You will hear this repeatedly, thousands and thousands of documents. But these are just numbers without substantive meaning. When you actually read those thousands of pages, you can see that many are already public, many of them are already heavily redacted, and many are simply missing. For example, we know they have a secret memo that an official at the Department of Commerce hand-delivered to Mr. Gore at DOJ, but they will not produce that document. We don't want thousands of pieces of paper. We want specific priority documents we asked for, unredacted and in full. We've been over backwards to try to work with the administration. We identified priority documents, we extended deadlines, and we even offered a review to review certain documents in camera. But the Trump administration is stonewalling and has left the committee with no choice but to obtain this information by a compulsory process. I hope my Republican colleagues will join us today, particularly given the urgency of ensuring that the rapidly approaching census accurately counts every person. And with that, I yield to the distinguished member of this committee, Mr. Jordan.
I thank the chairman. If, as Mr. Raskin said, this has nothing to do with the Supreme Court, the fact that they'll hear oral arguments in 3 weeks from today, would the chair be open to changing the date for the Gore transcribe, or now it'll be a deposition, the Gore transcribe, the Gore deposition from April 11th? How about April 24th, the day after the court hears the oral arguments on the case? Would you be open to that,
No.
Mr. Chairman? December 12th, 2017, the Justice Department sent the Commerce Department a letter saying, put the census question or citizenship question on the census. That's why they're doing it. Plain and simple. We have that memo. We've entered that letter into the record. As I said before, the Commerce Department has already given this committee 11,000 documents. Secretary Ross sat here and testified just 3 weeks ago for 6.5 hours, answered every question that was given to him. But now we have these 3 subpoenas. And it sort of begs the more obvious question, maybe the most obvious question. Why don't Democrats want to know if you're a citizen of this country or not? We've been asking the question for over 100 years on some form of the census or other. Now we want to make sure it's on the decennial census, but Democrats are bound and determined to do whatever they can to stop a simple question that every single American, if you went out and asked them, I would bet almost every American thinks should be asked and probably thinks is already being asked, and they would be right because it is. But you don't want it on the one that counts, the decennial one, where we do apportionment and make decisions based on the population around the country. That is the fundamental question. Again, I oppose these, as I said earlier. I hope we vote no. This is not how I think we should be operating. With that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. I want to yield to Mr. Clay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, the Trump administration has not been candid with Congress and the American people about the real reason they added a citizenship question to the 2020 census. Secretary Ross testified repeatedly before Congress and promised to tell the whole truth. Instead, he repeatedly gave misleading testimony. For example, on March the 20th, 2018, he testified, and I quote, "We are responding solely to the Department of Justice's request, not to any campaign request, not to any other political party request," end of quote. But the evidence shows Secretary Ross wanted to add the citizenship question months before DOJ made its request. In fact, he and his team engineered DOJ's request as a pretext to justify his decision. For example, on May the 2nd, 2017, May, not December, 7 months before Secretary Ross received DOJ's letter, he wrote to his staff, and I quote, "I am mystified why nothing have been done in response to my months-old request that we include the citizenship question. Why not?" End of quote. His staff responded, "On the citizenship question, we will get that in place. We need to work with Justice to get them to request that citizenship be added back as a census question." And we have the court cases to illustrate that DOJ has a legitimate need for the question to be included. End of quote. At our hearing on March the 14th, 2019, Chairman Cummings gave Secretary Ross the opportunity to withdraw his misleading testimony and come clean about the real reason he added the question. Secretary Ross stood by his earlier statements. Since we could not get the full story from Secretary Ross, this committee must examine the record. But the administration has withheld the key documents we need to determine why Secretary Ross was so insistent on adding this question. I fully support issuing subpoenas so we can finally get to the bottom of this. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I simply would like to know how many citizens we have in the United States of America. I would like to know how many non-citizens we have in the United States of America. I'd like to know how many of them are here legally and how many of them are here not legally. I can't imagine that anybody in this body would disagree with the desire to get that information. I understand there are other ways to get that information. There's the ACS, there's estimates, there's ways to do it between the census dates, but it strikes me as eminently reasonable for the United States government's executive branch to make a determination that we should, when we do our census every 10 years, include a question as to whether or not the individuals we are counting are in fact citizens of the United States. That doesn't change the purpose of the census to count bodies. It simply adds an additional piece of information that I am unaware of any reasonable American believing that we should not have. We are simply trying to understand who lives in the United States of America and whether or not they are citizens. We have to make countless determinations as a body all of the time based on that information. They involve voting, they involve redistricting, they involve all those things, but they involve bigger questions. They involve questions, or not bigger, different questions about benefits, about spending, about how we allocate resources. And I find all of this just getting this politicized nature of the question so extraordinary. And this is what I think is driving the American people insane. This is just basics, right? We're just counting heads, and we're asking a question. Now, I get it. There'd be a reasonable question to say, well, might this inhibit somebody who's here illegally from answering the question? I suppose that might be the case. I've looked into some of the data. I'm not sure it's dispositive that it will definitively cause the numbers to be out of whack. But importantly, I think the idea that the executive branch can't make a determination that it did from 1820 to 1950 to say when we're spending literally tens of millions of dollars going around the country to count heads, that we would suggest that it is wrong to then ask if you're a citizen, I think is extraordinary, actually. I think that's a really extraordinary statement for us to make as a body. I think that we as a body ought to be saying the opposite. As we sit here and look at what's happening right now with our borders and the number of people that we know today, and that nobody in this room would disagree, that we literally have thousands pouring across our borders as we speak, many of whom are not apprehended, many of whom are apprehended and then released. These are facts. This is happening literally as we sit here right now. There are thousands of people at our border coming across, getting processed and released, or coming across uncaptured. It seems to me that we as a sovereign nation ought to know this information. I think this is a simple question, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Ms. Norton.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to answer the gentleman's question. The census has found a way to find out the citizenship of people in the United States. It uses a sampling from a group to indicate the citizenship of people living in the United States. Now, why doesn't it simply ask that question of everybody living in the United States? Well, first, we depend on the wisdom of the framers. The framers said, or the Constitution says, all persons, not all citizens. So the Constitution says we need to know how many people are in this country, and there's a very good reason, because we've got to provide services often for whoever is in the country. So Republican and Democratic states need to know how many people, period, since most of what Congress passes doesn't say, and by the way, this service is only for people who you know are citizens of the United States. This is a profound constitutional question which has already been answered. One of the reasons I think that the citizens wanted all persons was it wanted an accurate census. We've got people coming across the border right now as I speak. I think my good friend indicated some of them. For example, from Central America. There are many people from Central America in this country who are legitimate citizens. The point of the census is not to frighten such people or inhibit such people from answering the census. They're not lawyers. They're not members of this committee. But they clearly could be deterred by a citizenship question without understanding what that question means and whether it is relevant. So the Constitution protects them by saying all persons, and yes, we need to know how many people are in this country illegally. And thanks to the good work of the census we have found a way to do that. For 70 years now, I remember, this is from memory, the census has used this alternative way, this statistical way, to find out who may be in the country illegally without taking from us what we are most after for the census in the first place, and that is an accurate census. So I think, Mr. Chairman, that you are doing exactly the right thing to make sure this committee does not deter what the framers insisted, even as there is a court case as I speak, which has, if vindicated what this committee is doing as it rises through the courts as I speak. And the court has, well, no formal decision by the Supreme Court because it's on the way the Supreme Court has been issued. The lower court decisions make very clear where the courts stand on the question of answering this question. I yield back.
Ms. Maloney. I'm sorry, Ms. Hill. Ms. Hill.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to respond to the remarks by Mr. Roy briefly. There is a recent study that was commissioned by the Census Bureau itself that shows that nearly half of participants in the study think that the census is used to identify people here without legal documentation, which in and of itself shows how unlikely they are to fully participate in the study. And Mr. Roy, I just looked up the statistics for your district, and it shows that nearly a third of people in your district identify as Hispanic origin. And I just feel like you would want your district to be fully accounted for so that you could get the resources you need. So it's just a note, and I'm willing to provide that study to be entered into the record.
May I respond really quickly, Mr. Chairman?
I'm sorry, I didn't see you, Mr. Roy.
No, that's all right. May I just respond to the generation?
She may yield to you. She may yield to you. You yield to him?
I'll yield.
All right.
I thank the gentlelady, and I appreciate her comments, and I'm well aware of the makeup of my congressional district. Number one, I don't look through the lens of how many resources can be doled out from Washington to the people of my district as much as I look at what my district can do for themselves and for the people of Texas.
I reclaim my time.
Nor do I think...
I reclaim my time.
It's your time.
I'm not talking about what resources can be doled out. I'm talking about fair representation for your district.
With all due respect, you talked about resources being doled out.
Yielding back to the chairman.
You yell? Very well. All right.
Move to strike the last word.
Yes, Mr.
I'll yield to the gentleman from Texas.
I thank my friend from North Carolina. This is what I have a problem with, among a number of things, is that we're talking about, and much of the conversations I've been hearing about is how much Washington can do in doling out for the people of the United States, when in fact the United States, the question here is what Americans could do for their country. I think there was some famous Democrat who talked about that sentiment. And from my standpoint, what we're talking about here is still a simple question: knowing who's in our country, and then importantly, whether the executive branch is in an appropriate position to make a determination that we should count people, count, as the Constitution says, how many people are here, and then ask the simple question whether or not they're a citizen of the United States. That's the question. Should the executive branch do that? They did it from 1820 to 1950. What is the news here? This is what we're talking about.
Would the gentleman yield?
And this
Why
is
did
a-
they stop
if-
doing it in 1950?
If it determined, well, the gentlelady asked a question, I'll answer the question, Mr. Chairman. The decision was made by a group of people at the time, the executive branch, to make a change in that policy. It's a policy choice. That's the point here. The thing that's always
What was the
interesting to me,
reason, sir?
ma'am, reclaiming the time that was yielded to me from the gentleman from North Carolina, is that it doesn't, I don't care what the reason is. I literally do not care. Whatever that the people in the executive branch in 1960 made a determination to define the census, the way they wanted to carry out the census, is for them to decide. It is for this administration in carrying out the duties to carry out the census to make a decision whether to include the question. The question here is that when you're talking about constitutionality, what has changed, right? The Constitution hasn't changed on this question between 1960 and today. And it's extraordinary to me the extent to which laws come and go and change as if the Constitution is completely meaningless to the question of constitutional law. And that's the reality. Because at no time has the Constitution changed. Yet there's some enormous question today about the constitutionality of this particular question being raised about whether or not we should ask somebody whether they're a citizen of the United States. That is what is extraordinary to me. This is a very simple question. I yield back to the gentleman from North Carolina.
And I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Very well. Ms. Maloney.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I stand behind the chairman and his decision to issue this subpoena for documents related to Secretary Ross's decision to add the citizenship question to the 2020 census. Even under the most transparent conditions, this decision would warrant congressional oversight. Given the profound and lasting consequences the census count has on our ability to govern, grow our economy, and represent the American people. But since this decision was announced, the administration has been withholding and redacting critical documents related to this decision. Secretary Ross and DOJ official John Gore have refused to answer countless questions about their conversations with other administration officials regarding the process by which this decision was made. And evidence from the limited administrative record makes clear that this decision to add the citizenship question to the 2020 census was pretextual. In other words, it was decided before they came up with their justification. These are not my words. They are the words of two separate federal judges. My question is why? Why did Secretary Ross say that he responded solely to the Department of Justice's request to add the question, when his emails showed that he decided to add the question in his first days on the job, and later asked multiple agencies to formally request it for him? Why did Secretary Ross decide to add the question over the objection of his own Census Bureau professionals, statisticians, who said it would lead to a lower response rate? Why did Secretary Ross feel it was necessary to violate federal law and procedural precedents to add the question? This committee has been given the administration every single chance and then some to voluntarily come forward with these answers. We've identified a limited set of priority documents, given the administration additional time to produce them, and followed up no less than 25 times. 25 times we've requested it. That's why we need to subpoena it now. The administration has tried to minimize their compliance behind a claim that this issue is subject to ongoing litigation. But the Supreme Court has made clear multiple times that ongoing litigation cannot inhibit congressional oversight. It is now clear that the administration has absolutely no intention of cooperating with this effort voluntarily. We have no choice left but to compel them to cooperate. Our constituents, regardless of where they live, rely on accurate census data, whether they know it or not. An undercount means less federal money for programs that help Americans get by, and less representation at every level of government. Failure to reconcile these inconsistencies totally and completely is not only an abdication of our authority to conduct oversight, it is a failure to represent the interest of the very people who elected us to serve them, and runs counter to our oath to uphold and defend our Constitution. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this request. This request is to get to the truth. We have tried 25 times with requests to get this information. It has been denied to us. This subpoena is needed, and I hope that everyone will support it, and I yield to the chairman.
Thank you very much. Ms. Connolly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank my colleague from New York for her statement. I will say that our friend, Mr. Roy, who's not here, brought up what I think is a red herring. Democrats and other critics have not raised the question of the constitutionality of adding a citizenship question. We have raised the issue of the appropriateness of it and the consequences of doing it. There's a reason we haven't had it on the census since 1950. That's the issue. So no more red herrings, please. And speaking of red herrings, some of my colleagues have argued, Mr. Chairman, that it's premature to issue the subpoenas we're considering today to the Department of Commerce, and because the Department and DOJ have produced more than 11,000 pages of documents. And boy, does that sound impressive. 11,000. But these documents are riddled with a word called redactions. Let me show you an example of a redacted page of those documents. If anyone can find a single word on that page, I'll buy them lunch. Let me show you another page about the 2020 census that was part of the 11,000 documents provided to this committee. Whoops. All right, you say I'm exaggerating. So let me give you a page that's only mostly blacked out. That's what redactions are. And that's essentially what we've been getting. Should the department be getting credit for producing things like that? Some of my colleagues have also claimed that a subpoena is hasty because the department has not had enough time to produce the requested documents. Nice try. We've been asking for more than a month for the department to lift these redactions, and we've made repeated accommodations to address the department's concerns. For example, on February 22nd, committee staff asked the department staff to lift the redactions. The department refused. On March 6th, Chairman Cummings requested unredacted copies of a limited set of priority documents to be produced by the March 14th hearing. The department produced 0. At the committee's March 14th hearing, Chairman Cummings asked Secretary Ross to commit by March 19th production of key documents without redactions. He did not. Committee staff followed up the next day with a list of 11 specific documents that needed to be produced without redactions. The department produced 0. On March 29th, Chairman Cummings wrote again, explaining in detail why the committee needed unredacted copies of those 11 key documents he had previously requested. As of today, the department has not produced a single one of those documents without redactions. They've had more than enough time, and they've shown their true stripes. So let's not get fascinated by volume. It's about the content. And we need access to that content if we're going to make reasoned judgments about the validity and appropriateness of that question on the census, given the fact that the census is so important. Mr. Chairman, as you know, getting an accurate census is all important. The census is one of the few mandated activities for the federal government written into the Constitution. We don't just have a statutory responsibility to try to get it right. We have a sacred constitutional responsibility as members of Congress to make sure it's gotten right, because it lasts for 10 years. And what could go wrong if the census is inaccurate? Well, all federal resources flow based on census data. All reapportionment in terms of representation by our voters and citizens and residents at the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level flow from accurate census data or inaccurate census data. And I might add, red and blue states can be affected by inaccurate census data. And I see my friend from New York, and I'm glad to yield.
I asked the gentleman to yield to me briefly. I want to underscore the point that he's making, that it's got to be accurate. And in the decisions of the two judges that basically threw the censorship question off the questionnaire, they said that he did not follow the law. He did not follow the procedures and the administrative code of the Census Department. So my question is, why did Secretary Ross feel it was necessary to violate federal law and procedural precedents to add the citizenship question?
Reclaiming my time, and I thank my colleague.
I must get this on the record. Or may I request the permission to put it into the record?
Without objection, so ordered.
Okay, I place this in the record.
I thank my friend. I just want to get in before I lose my time. I support the chairman's request for subpoenas because I think the department has not responded in good faith, and we have no alternative. And the stakes, as my friend from New York just pointed out, are so high and so important. I yield back.
Ms. Wasserman Schultz.
Thank you. I move to strike the last word. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record this Miami Herald article from yesterday, April 1st. The headline is, "In Miami-Dade, scared immigrants may not answer the census. That could be costly."
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to point out what this story talks about. Miami-Dade County is home to a majority of Hispanic residents, many of whom are, in fact, I would argue most of whom are immigrants to this country. The Miami-Dade County Commission, and thus Miami-Dade County, is on record opposing adding the citizenship question to the census. And I think it's important to note that they adopted a resolution that included the following statement: Miami-Dade County has long been a home to a large number of immigrants from Latin America and the Caribbean, among other places, and will likely face an undercount of its population if the citizenship question is included on the 2020 census. That was adopted by the County Commission 11-1, and it is also, the citizenship question's inclusion is also opposed by the Republican Mayor, Carlos Jimenez of Miami-Dade County. Purely and simply, we can have a debate all day long, although I think it's pretty clear that this is not constitutional, but we can have a debate all day long about that. What my colleagues have, and I join them in underscoring, have expressed is the deep concern that adding a citizenship question will result in a severe undercount, and communities like Miami-Dade County, Broward County, frankly, and other communities with large immigrant populations will face an undercount, and thus the formulas that are used to calculate the funding that is given in nearly every program that is formula-driven in our U.S. budget will severely impact our ability to provide services to these communities. It's unnecessary. It's outrageous. It is clearly designed intentionally to undercount immigrants because, as we noted from the President's tweet yesterday, he doesn't even consider Puerto Ricans as citizens in the same way that he considers every other non-Puerto Rican American. So he certainly doesn't care about making sure that we count immigrants to this country, whether or not they've naturalized or are not naturalized American citizens. Counting Every individual in the country is the purpose of the census, and it is absolutely essential that we do nothing, particularly something that is so unnecessary, damaging, and irrelevant to the goal of achieving a full count of the individuals that reside in our country. The purpose and the evasion of the reasoning behind adding the citizenship question from the Commerce Department is quite evident, and we need to make sure that it is successful. I'm hoping that that will be successful in the courts, and we need to get to the bottom of the true purpose, which I think we all know, and which is why there are so many redactions in the documents we've asked for and why they've been denying us access to those documents. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your indulgence. I'd be happy to yield.
Let me say this. First of all, I want to thank you for making the point that you just made. I think everybody, I hope, we want an accurate count. That's the bottom line. Exactly. We want an accurate count. We are in a time in our country where many people, even before the last few years, feared providing information to government.
Right, right.
And in talking to a number of people in my district, and sounds like you have the same concerns, you got some people who are, their fear has probably tripled because they just, and not because they did anything wrong, but they've got relatives, they don't, and they just, all we want is an accurate count. And that's, people keep saying, oh, you don't want to count everybody. Well, we are. That's exactly what we want.
The whole point.
And so I want to thank you for your words, because I think that really goes to the bottom line, and I appreciate it.
Thank you. I yield back the balance of my
Thank
time.
you very much. Mr. Raskin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Move to strike the last word. First of all, I want to just echo my colleague from Florida's sentiments about the fundamental importance of the census. Our Constitution calls for an actual enumeration of the people who are in the country, everybody. When the country started, even the slaves were counted. Then it was discounted by the 3/5 provision, but we knew how many people were here, including the slaves. Everybody was counted. And that's our constitutional duty, to make that happen, not to interfere in that process, not to thwart that process, not to undermine that process, but to effectuate that process. And the role of the president and the executive branch is to take care that the laws are faithfully executed. They've got to implement the provisions that relate to the census to make sure that everybody's counted. Now, our colleagues have repeatedly suggested, Mr. Chairman, that there's something wrong with our conducting our constitutional oversight duty and our legislative duties while ongoing litigation is taking place about a matter that we're investigating. Well, 90 years ago, the Supreme Court put this matter to rest in a case called Sinclair versus United States, where the court wrote, the authority of Congress directly or through its committees to require pertinent disclosures in aid of its own constitutional power is not abridged, because the information sought to be elicited may also be of use in pending lawsuits. That was 90 years ago, and the Supreme Court has continually underscored that point. Why? Because we've got an independent constitutional power and an independent constitutional responsibility to do the people's work. That's what Article I is all about. So the fact that there's an Article III case or controversy being litigated does not undermine our power to pursue our work. Now, our colleagues across the aisle have a structural problem, Mr. Chairman, because during the Obama administration, they aggressively pressed the powers of Congress all the way to the max, as well they should have, in order to do the work of Congress as they saw fit. They investigated and they subpoenaed while there was litigation going on the very matters that they were interested in. Few examples. In 2015, Chairman Chaffetz investigated the Waters of the United States rule while there was a parallel lawsuit filed by 22 states challenging the rule on the exact same grounds that was being investigated by the committee. Nonetheless, the committee obtained documents pertaining to the investigation. In 2015 and 16, Chairman Chaffetz, Representative Jordan, the ranking member of this committee, Representative Meadows, and others investigated Cover Oregon, the state of Oregon's ACA exchange. The investigation was conducted at the exact same time as ongoing civil litigation between the Oracle Corporation and Cover Oregon. The committee issued 4 subpoenas for depositions and obtained testimony from key witnesses. This committee also obtained documents from the governor's office, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, Oracle Corporation, others. I don't mean to bore everybody to death with this. The point is obvious. The amazing thing is that our colleagues somehow think that we would forget. Our colleagues think that we would not point out the obvious inconsistency between their issuing subpoenas during ongoing litigation and turning around at this moment, now that the tables have turned, to say we can't do that. Come on. This is silliness, and it's a waste of the time of this committee, Mr. Chairman. And I am really troubled by the constant dilatory tactics and the haranguing and the harassment of the chairman, who is doing a far fairer and more scrupulously even-handed job than this committee has seen in a very long time. And I'll leave it at that. Mr. Chairman, we are very proud of the work that you're doing. We hope that every member of this committee will support the committee in its investigations and support our efforts to make sure there's a real census that takes place in 2020. I yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Meadows.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I just ask unanimous consent to put the minorities report in the record, which outlines some contradictions to the gentleman from Maryland's point, namely comments by my good friend, the chairman of the full committee here.
Without objection.
And with that, I appreciate the gentleman's courtesy, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. There being no further discussion or amendments to the resolution, the question now occurs on adoption of the substitute amendment offered by the chairman. All those in favor should signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. No. In the opinion, the ayes have it. The ayes have it, and the amendment is adopted. The question now occurs on the issuance of subpoenas relating to the 2020 census. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
We ask for a recorded vote.
There will be a recorded vote. The recorded vote has been requested. All those in favor of a recorded vote shall raise their hand and be counted. A sufficient number having raised their hands, a recorded vote is so ordered. And pursuant to Clause 2 of Rule 11, the vote on this question is postponed. Now, to the members, there will be 2 to 3 floor votes at 1:15, between 1:15 and 1:30. What I want to do is I know people have other things to do, but I want to set a time certain for the vote. And that time certain will be at 2:30. 2:30. Got that? And I expect to be finished with the vote by 2:35. All right? By 2:35. All right. So we'll be in recess. Thank you.